But the historian couldn't say God raised Jesus. But they could say Jesus was raised. One of the most popular opposing theories to the resurrection of Jesus is that Jesus' disciples and the skeptic Paul experienced visions or hallucinations of the risen Jesus. This is quite easily addressed by recognizing that only about 7%, this is from studies by mental health professionals over more than a century now, only about 7% of those who are grieving the loss of a loved one experience a visual hallucination of that loved one. Yet with the disciples, you have 100%. You also have group experiences. Now, what mental health professionals have learned is that hallucinations are private occurrences in the mind of an individual. They have no external reality to them. So in that sense, they're like dreams. I couldn't wake up my wife in the middle of the night and say, honey, I'm having a dream I'm in Hawaii. Go back to sleep, join me in my dream, and let's have a free vacation. You can't do that because the dream is going on in my brain. It's not being experienced by her. She may dream she's in Hawaii. We may dream it simultaneously, but it's not the same dream. And it's the same with hallucinations. They're occurring in the mind of an individual, so you can't have a collective experience. It could be that a bunch of people in a room who are high on drugs will be experiencing hallucinations, but it's not the same one. And then you got the appearance to Paul. Paul was not grieving Jesus' death. He believed Jesus was a failed Messiah and a false prophet. So Jesus would have been the last person in the universe that Paul would have expected to see or wanted to see. Perhaps the most popular explanation, alternate explanation to the resurrection, has to do with miracles. They'll say, well, the historian can't adjudicate on a miracle claim because it assumes God's existence and God is beyond what the tools of historians can find. But we don't have to, as historians, assume God's existence. We can just say, well, we're just going to be open to it. We're not going to exclude it. We're not going to assume it. Let's let the evidence point to where it does. And if it really appears that a supernatural, a spiritual event has occurred, and it's extremely unlikely that a natural explanation or a natural cause was involved, then I think we can say that a miracle happened if there's good evidence for it. And of course, that would suggest God's existence. But you don't a priori rule out a miracle because you don't like the idea of God's existence. I've also heard it say that a miracle is the least probable explanation, to which I say least probable in reference to what? Because if God exists and wanted to raise Jesus, well, then the resurrection of Jesus would have been the best explanation, the most probable explanation of what occurred. So least probable in reference to what? Well, maybe he was raised by natural causes. Okay, I agree, that's the least probable explanation. But if it's by natural causes, it's not a miracle, is it? So it seems like this objection that a miracle by its very definition is the least probable explanation. No, that doesn't fit. That is skewed toward a skeptical mind. And that's weighing in with your worldview, with your skepticism, rather than weighing in with the data. And finally, there's the theological explanation that is given. They'll say, look, if you say Jesus rose from the dead, now you're admitting, that can't happen without God. And so it's a theological explanation, not a historical one. Well, that's not a reason, I would say, that's not a reason to say you can't investigate a miracle claim. I mean, suppose a comet came and crashed in the moon's surface and some astronomers are watching through a telescope as the lunar dust settles, and they see a message written on the moon's surface, and it says, Jesus is Lord. And it's written in Hebrew and in Greek. Well, the astronomers would have no idea what caused that message to be written on the moon's surface. They wouldn't have the tools to know whether God did it. They would just have to leave the cause unexplained. But they wouldn't say, well, we can't affirm that the comet crashed on the moon and left this message. Well, of course not. That's undisputed. That would be undisputable. But the cause, they would have to leave a question mark there because scientists don't have the tools to determine God. In the same way, a historian can look at the data and say, you know, there's no plausible natural explanations that can explain this data. In fact, the best explanation by far is that Jesus rose from the dead, and it really appears that this is the case. But the historian couldn't say God raised Jesus. But they could say Jesus was raised.